the tools that we have as human beings to judge other human beings are not always as relevant or useful when we're judging AI. You could work with something like ChatGPT. You could have 19 interactions with it, and they could all be really accurate and really useful. And then the 20th, it might be complete hallucination. And then it'll go back to being reliable once more, right? So it does these strange things that where by the tools that we have as humans to judge them, we start to use them because it's natural to use them. And then we end up misjudging the technology that we're interacting with.
Welcome to the Leadership Disrupted podcast. And today we have with us Paul Slater, who's the host of the Humanity Working podcast, where it turns out I've been a guest. In fact, I've been a guest twice. I was invited back a second time, which I'm not sure what it says about me, but that's not like a usual experience. Not that people don't want to have me back, but getting invited back a second time, meaning, hey, we liked you. It was a great experience on the Humanity Working podcast. And I would highly recommend it if you're looking for other podcasts focused on helping people optimize how they're working in today's world. In addition, Paul is an author, a speaker, a workforce advisor. And what brings us here today specifically is the recent publication of Paul's latest book called The AI Ready Human. And we're going to have a deep, wide-ranging conversation about that book, particularly how that book relates to leading others. It wouldn't surprise me if Paul eventually has a follow-up book called The AI Ready Leader, because I think so much of what I've already read in Paul's book definitely relates to the world of leaders and how we can become more effective leaders. So we're going to deep dive for the next hour or so into that specific book. But before we do that, first of all, Paul, welcome. And is there anything else you'd like to share regarding your background, your history, your point of view, before we deep dive into all things the AI Ready Human related?
Sure. Yeah. Very briefly. Oh, hello, everybody. And hello, Dan. Good to see you again. Very briefly about my history. I have been in, I'd like to say, the intersection of technology and humanity for pretty much my entire career. My career began in the 90s, teaching people how to use this strange thing that had appeared on their desk called a computer, and where people really, many of the people that I worked with initially had literally zero connection with information technology. The most interesting piece of technology they probably ever interacted with was their TV as they were switching channels on their remote or something like that. And so from that moment, from the moment where I was teaching a bunch of, I would say, scared middle-aged people who thought that this big beige box that was appeared under their desk and a huge monitor on top of their desk. Most of them, by the way, thought their monitor was the computer. From that moment, I saw this really, really interesting space, the humans and the technology and the interface between all of them. And throughout a long career, starting in learning and development, getting into consulting, working for Microsoft for over a decade, it was always that space that kept drawing me back. And so more recently in 2020, I formed a learning and development focused company that was really centered around the human capabilities that people needed to thrive in this new world. And now today, it's become I'd say my full-time obsession, which is not specifically, although it's very fascinating, not specifically all of the technology changes that AI will bring, but what is the impact of humans on that, and how do humans need to adjust themselves and adapt themselves in order to thrive in this new world.
Well, and let me say, your background as a learning and development person definitely comes through in the book, because I found myself feeling like I was being guided essentially through a workshop. I mean, thought by thought, day by day, step by step. It wasn't just interesting reading. You were taking me through exercises that would actually help me integrate, think through, apply, or at least more deeply internalize particular thoughts. And one of the first ones that grabbed me as because I downloaded your book from Kindle, and it was in fact, I think it was either on publication day or the day after, because you and I knew each other, and I knew I was going to invite you onto this podcast, so I knew I had to do my homework. But the first phrase that really grabbed my attention, you mentioned the brilliant intern who lies. And it was, I thought it was a great way of thinking about AI, and speaking both to the strength and the challenges of leveraging AI. Anything you can share with us about that concept?
Yeah, sure.
Or just how to think, like as we're starting, how should we think about AI as a tool, a resource, or whatever for ourselves?
Yeah. Well, first off, that exact phrase, I hope I credit him. I think I do. That exact phrase is not mine. It was Ethan Mollick's. He was in an interview that he gave a ways back. But I loved it as a mental model because it captures multiple things about AI, all of which are true at the same time, right? So if you have a brilliant intern, right, they can be very, very valuable. If you have a brilliant intern, and they're brilliant, not just intellectually brilliant, but just brilliant to have, then they probably work super hard, and AI can work super hard, right? They get a bunch of stuff done, right? And so all of these are, can be really, really good things. But the who lies thing is really, is a really interesting aspect of it, which is that under normal circumstances, the way we judge humans, when we bring humans into our world, is we determine their value through a series of things that tend to come along with each other, right? So are they hardworking? Are they reliable? And entrenched within that, entrenched within the concept of being hardworking and reliable, is being trustworthy. So in other words, you would expect them to act based on their knowledge, or if they don't know something, find out, or if they don't know something, tell you, or if they're not sure, need help, right? That's part of how they express value. But this is like an intern you've never seen before.
Once something is pushed to our screen and you're reading it on the screen, our instinct is to trust whatever was pushed to our screen, or you see a grid, or you see something visualized, or you see something that looks like data. The instinct is, well, then it must be true. But in reality, garbage in, garbage out. AI is simply scraping the world, so to speak, and then doing a remarkable job of processing that information and delivering it back. But it's not always gospel truth, of course.
Well, and if I were to add one word to Ethan Mollick's quote, I think I would have said, I would have kept it as the brilliant intern who lies, but I would have said the brilliant intern who lies unpredictably. And that's the real aspect of it, because the tools that we have as human beings to judge other human beings are not always as relevant or useful when we're judging AI. So for example, if I'm trying to determine whether, in quotes, I can trust another human, then what I do is I'm going through a sort of verification process. In other words, if I've worked with somebody, and I've worked for somebody over the course of weeks and months and so on, and every time they come back to me and I in a way that I would expect, and they appear to be honest and trustworthy and so on and so forth, then it's very likely that they are, right?
Right.
You and I have had 2 or 3 conversations right now. I can tell from working with you that you know what you know, and if you're not sure of something, you say you're not sure of something, and all of those kind of things that you need in order to be able to build up trust with another human being. In this case, you could work with something like ChatGPT. You could have 19 interactions with it, and they could all be really accurate and really useful. And then the 20th, it might be complete hallucination. And then it'll go back to being reliable once more, right? So it does these strange things that where by the tools that we have as humans to judge them, we start to use them because it's natural to use them. And then we end up misjudging the technology that we're interacting with.
And I do understand how people use the word hallucination to reference those kinds of things, but I think to some degree that's a misnomer, because it's not actually, it's not making things up.
No,
something within the mass of data that it was scraping caused it to process and to think, and then based on that processing, it turns it into something that's not real. It's like putting a drop of ink in a gallon of water. That ink, wherever that ink resides, can have an impact on you, I guess, how you view the clarity of the water. I have to be honest with you. I'm very ambivalent about AI. I don't let AI touch any of my creative work, like what I would consider creative work. I don't even want to go there, like where you might ask, hey, read this paragraph or give me some insights about. It's almost like I have a Chinese firewall. I don't let it touch, but anything that's not creative, where I'm looking for data to be processed, I'm a heavy user of AI, to the point where I had a project where I was doing interviews with 25 different people. I recorded those interviews, I transcribed those interviews, and part of my goal with the process was to step back and look for broad themes. Look for, but it's 25 hour-long interviews, 25 hours of content. So once I was done, and once I had transcribed everything, I started to read through the transcriptions, and it's just a lot. So I stepped back and I uploaded all 25 documents, all transcribed recordings into Google Notebook LM. And then before I did anything else, I went to my pad of paper. In fact, I've got it right here. This is the specific piece of paper where I said to myself, okay, Dan's little brain, what were the major themes that came out of this? And I recorded those themes, and I was pretty happy with that. And then I asked the same question of Notebook LM, and sure enough, it captured my themes, different language, but captured those themes. But there were three other things that came up that once I saw them on the screen, I remembered, oh yeah, that's right. This person and this person and this person and this person did mention that was part of those conversations. And so it was able to process far more data than my little human brain could process. So it was a really good partner in that respect. And then once it had all of those 25 conversations, I was able to leverage it like a brilliant intern to do some of the grunt work for me that I could have spent hours and hours doing for myself. At the same time, though, I felt like I had to validate everything that it was telling me, because I don't want it just to make up a particular theme that came out of the conversations.
There's a subtlety though there to what you did, which I think is really fascinating, and is an indication of how working with AI in a different way, in a different order, results generates different results. So in the book, we talk in a couple of places about the idea of, like, you could do the same set of steps in a different order using AI, and you will end up with different types of results. So for example, what you said to me there was, before I asked Notebook LM for its feedback, I pulled out what I thought were the most important themes. Then Notebook LM came back to me with these things, and I saw, yes, this, and this, and this, and that's really useful.
Yeah.
If you'd have flipped that process, and I've seen this in my research, and it's been well documented elsewhere as well, if you'd have flipped that process and you'd have said, before you did your own assessment, you'd have said to Notebook LM, give me your thoughts, it's extremely likely that rather than Notebook LM expanding your thinking, expanding the thinking you'd already done, it would restrict your thinking because you would just take what it said and then search for and look for things that it didn't say, which is a much harder thing to do, right? So just in that case, right, before or after the human brain engages, makes a huge difference to the overall quality of output. And that's really a lot of what we're trying to get at here, right? I'm trying to help people understand that by just being thoughtful in terms of the how and the when they engage with AI, when they choose to, when they choose not to, just that act of being thoughtful about it can make an enormous difference to how much you thrive as AI becomes more and more dominant.
Does it cause you to worry regarding what you just described? Because if we don't do what you just described, I could see our brains atrophying. I could see it. We don't have to do the hard thinking, the hard creativity, the hard processing. Does that worry you?
Yes. MIT has already done research on this, and they took a group of people. I think they broke them into 3 groups from memory, whereby they presented them with a problem. They asked the first group of people to think about the problem basically kind of independently of technology. They took the second group of people and asked them to use traditional search tools to help them, like Google, for example. And then they asked the third group of people to use tools like ChatGPT to help them. I think in this case it was actually ChatGPT. And solving the problem was one aspect of it, but what they were really looking for, and because they put monitors on these people, and what they were really looking for was the degree of cognitive engagement in those people. And they found that the people that were using AI to help them were making far fewer, if you like, neural connections than the people that were trying to solve the problem themselves. And they saw some evidence that this was persisting post the task as well. And so I do worry about it. Now, we have to be careful, right? Because, you and I are both old enough to remember calculators are going to destroy us, or spreadsheets are going to destroy us, and all this kind of stuff. But this is broader and bigger, right? This is something that is where it's certainly not artificial general intelligence in the way in which it's commonly defined, but it is something that is broadly and generally useful. And even if you don't worry about what it's doing to our brains, and I suggest that you should, but even if you don't, then there's still a question of quality of output, right? The example that you just provided about engaging with it before, and as I said, versus engaging with it afterwards, the likelihood is that the quality of output that you're going to come up with in the case where you're putting that work in beforehand and have already engaged your brain or already thinking about it, and using that engaged state of brain to then interact with the output of Notebook LM, that's going to produce a better result, even if you don't care what's happening to your brain. And I strongly suggest that you do, because you need to be relevant as AI continues to grow in dominance and capability.
I have spoken to a few people who consider themselves still thoughtful purists, where they don't want to leverage AI because they don't want AI to replace their brain. And I don't have a good case for the other answer, but my instinct has been to them to say, there was a time when email first came out, when there were people who wanted to be purists and did not want to use email. They wanted to handwrite. They wanted to read. They didn't want to use email. But the challenge is, everyone else is using email. It's making everyone else more productive. You can't opt out. Opting out won't make sense. It might make sense in this very moment, but give it 6 months, give it a year. You can't opt out of email. And the same is true of each of these progressive technologies. I hate to say it, but as someone in business, as someone in the world of work, you have to, number one, know how these apply to your role, to your job, but then you can't opt out. Because all it will do is cause you to be less productive, less effective than the 98% who are going ahead and leveraging them for good, for ill, for whatever. And I think the same is true with AI. you can't opt out of AI. You have to find a way to leverage it effectively without it diminishing your own mental capacity, which is why I love your approach in the book, because I think that's the path you take someone down. You don't avoid the downside. You don't avoid the security issues. You don't avoid anything. I mean, you step right into many of those challenges, and I'm going to ask you to share some of those with us. But you don't avoid the reality. You actually guide us through kind of an integration process. And honestly, I'm only about a third of the way through as I was going, step by step. But I found it to be really helpful. But maybe if we back up, I mean, let me ask you, what do most people get wrong about AI? As we're talking about AI, we're listening about AI, we're watching, we're hearing, we're getting exposed. You can't not get exposed to tons and tons of information on AI. But given the nature of our world of information and misinformation, what are we getting wrong, or what are many people getting wrong about AI?
There's actually, I would argue, there's an awful lot that people are getting wrong about AI, but I'll mention 2 or 3 that I just think are the most important.
Mm-hmm.
So I think one of the key things that they're getting wrong, we've almost touched upon already, which is the probabilistic nature of AI. So when we opened the discussion, we were talking about it being, randomly wrong at periods. Under the covers, this is just probability models. So AI doesn't, to your point about hallucination, right? AI doesn't lie because it doesn't have a concept of lying,
Mm-hmm.
but nor does it have a concept of telling the truth, right? So what it's predicting, literally down to the word level, if you're talking about generative AI, is it's like, what's the best next word I'm going to spit out, right? And it's doing it as fast as it can. So, and it's guessing like 3 times in a row. So, So when you ask it a question, right, it's guessing what your question is, right? Because it doesn't really know, right? Then it's guessing what it needs to access to come up with the answer. And then it's guessing what the best answer should be, right? So that's like guess after guess after guess. It just happens to be really good at it, right?
Yeah.
And so most of the time it's getting it right, but when it gets it wrong, it can get it wrong unpredictably. And so the problem here is that, as is well known and well documented, and if you speak to anybody who my degree is in statistics, so for me it's I'm a more comfortable space with that than a lot of people are. But for most people, right, the counterintuitive nature of statistics makes it quite difficult to interact with something that is entirely probability based underneath the covers. And it just is, that's why it can become very frustrating. So I think that's the first thing. The second thing, though, which I think is probably like as important or more important, is I think many people who are interacting with something like ChatGPT on a daily basis, they think of it just as a tool, right? And they're familiar with tools, right? How do you interact with Excel? Well, you learn Excel and then you start to do more with Excel. So you learn the basics of Excel, then you start to do more, and you build your understanding of the capability of the tool. And as your understanding of working with that tool increases, your capability with that tool increases. And so you saw that when the thing came out, because as soon as ChatGPT launched, by the way, the fastest technology ever to have been adopted in the history of all technology, within 9 months, half of all office workers had used it at least once. That's way faster than, I don't know, Instagram, for example.
Without any research or assessment regarding the impact, like the unintended consequences. It's like, all right, it's there. And you would never let a food get launched that way. You would never let a medicine get launched that way. But suddenly we're in your brains.
Yep, precisely. So this thing, right, is that we're using very excessively. Our mindset coming into it is like, we've seen this. We know what this is. I'm a pattern matcher. It's a tool. It's a tool like any other tool. And so what did people do? Very unsurprisingly, right? They said, okay, well, in order to interact with this tool, I need to be good at this thing called prompt engineering. Prompt engineering, for people that are not familiar with the term, I say in the book, right? It doesn't matter if you don't know what prompt engineering is, because basically it just means having a good conversation with AI. But they went on courses, and the courses would say to them, okay, here's how you engineer your prompt in order to get good answers back. And the theory was that if you just became really, really, really good at asking the right questions, then you could have reliable answers out of it day in, day out. And what that misses is that it's not a tool in the same way that any of the other tools that we have used previously. And what it really is a disruptive force that fundamentally changes how we work. And not only does it fundamentally change how we work, but it's changed it already, and it will change it again and again and again and again and again. And so what this means is, if you would take a really big picture, by the way, my next book is going to be called The AI Ready Organization. So not the AI Ready Leader, because somebody's already snagged that one. But but when you think about it take a step back and think about it from the organizational perspective, what that means is that at an organizational level, we've gone through some real shifts in terms of the how, the when, the why, the who we work with. All of those aspects of work have shifted fairly dramatically over the next 10 to 15 years. That change is going to accelerate faster and faster and faster. That brilliant intern that lies is going to be more brilliant tomorrow than it was today, and more brilliant still than it was 2 days ago, and so on and so forth. And so we're working alongside, AI is part of our team, and we're working alongside a thing that is repeatedly and systematically getting better and better and better and better. And we have to adjust our work style in order to be able to accomplish that. So that affects how we learn, it affects how we grow, it affects how we, take breaks, it affects how we approach work, it affects all of those different things. So I think they're potentially overplaying its capabilities as a tool and underplaying its capabilities as a disruptive force that is transforming work.
Let me share with you one anecdote from the world of work, and get your response to this. I know one organization, one team within an organization where their CEO and senior leaders were all very gung-ho regarding AI, and it's a digital media marketing company. They generate a lot of videos, a lot of images, and they were directed by their CEO and senior leaders that 30% of their video output needs to be AI generated by X amount of time. So the CEO was going to drive this. He was tired of waiting for it to happen organically. So he was going to drive this. And the reason I know this story is because I was talking to one of the video editors, producers, and this person said to me, I'm creating this using our old systems because AI won't generate the quality that I need. It's faster for me to do it my old way, but I have to tell my boss that it's AI generated because he has demanded that it be AI generated. But so he was basically doing like double work, working late at night because of this pressure for AI generation. I checked in with him 6 months later, and he was becoming more and more familiar with AI tools, but he said, there's just some work that it won't do, and yet my leaders don't want to hear that because they want the efficiency. They want to be able to get the work of 10 people out of 3 people, and I don't know. Does that prompt any thoughts?
It does. Well, and I mean, I mentioned that there are many, many ways in which people have misconceptions. I think that is a really big one as well. And this, I blame absolutely OpenAI and a whole bunch of other of the originals, but particularly OpenAI for this, right? This idea that it is a productivity, something that explodes productivity, human productivity. And under certain circumstances, it can. And I think if you look at if I look at how I use AI and what I get done on an average day today is probably more than I did before, and I'm able to do personally some things that I would not have been able to do before. So there is a productivity element to it, but the reality is that what the promise that it really brings is actually much more subtle than that, right? It's, if used in the right way, if used at the right times, if used as a member of your team that is going to assist you, then it allows you to produce high quality content in faster and more efficiently than you would be able to do previously. But that does not imply that the way you get there is to just hand over entire tasks to AI and have it produce substandard slop. It is, how do you, if you're looking at the entire body of work that you're producing, what's the role that AI has in helping you produce that? And oftentimes, when you think about it that way, that might be a 10% increase in productivity, in efficiency, if you like, but a 50% increase of quality at the same time, right? Your example that we led off with, right? You mentioned that Notebook LM came up with insights which you validated and you would not have come up with yourself. So that's a quality improvement.
Absolutely.
But it relied upon the partnership between you and Notebook LM to do it.
One of the things that my organization does is employee engagement surveys, and our surveys have historically been, hey, click on the dots. How do you feel about your reward and recognition program? On a scale of 1 to 10, click on the dots. So everything is answering questions and then rating on a scale of 1 to 5 or a scale of 1 to 10, and then of course that produces outputs, metric-driven outputs. And we have rarely, maybe never, offered chances for anecdotal feedback for any of those questions, because you survey 10,000 employees, and 5,000 of them tell you anecdotally what they think of your reward and recognition program. What human is going to take the time to take all of that information in? However, now we're looking at leveraging AI, where we could ask all 10,000 employees, yes, rate the recognition program on a scale of 1 to 10, but do you have any thoughts or comments? And you can take all of that anecdotal data on 20 different areas and ask AI to process it. Now, after it processes it, to avoid hallucinations, you have to go back and validate with the metrics that you've been capturing. But it does open up the possibility of assessing much more data. You can open up your aperture to a lot more information than possibly we've done in the past. So I do think there are great opportunities to leverage AI to get better and smarter at a lot of the things that we're doing. But I think you're right. Most people right now look at it as kind of a short-term productivity tool. I can get work done faster. And if I'm a leader, if I think of it in a certain way where it's just going to increase efficiencies, well, then I should be able to minimize my workforce. I should be able to, and it's happening. I mean, we see it. I'm feeling a certain cognitive dissonance when I hear about AI, because the AI advocates, they don't want you to be afraid of it. So they won't talk about layoffs. They won't talk about people losing their jobs. They'll talk about the opportunities, all of the nice stuff. But the reality is people are losing their jobs. There are layoffs, and it is happening. There is whether you call it a dark side or a downside, it is happening. And I think if we don't step into that reality, we're not going to help people prepare for what their career is going to be in a post-AI world. How do you handle that when someone in a creative role in particular is resistant to AI because they feel like AI is their competitor?
Yeah, it's a very interesting and difficult, I would say, balancing act. And it's most difficult because of the most complicated piece of technology in the entire equation, which is the human. So we're messy, right? Human beings are emotional. Human beings get tired. Human beings can be highly irrational, right? And so the relationship that they have with AI, whether they think about it or not, is affecting all of those aspects of what it is to be human. So I'll give you a concrete example that I've seen in my research. So as I was starting the process of building this book, I interviewed a couple hundred people about their day-to-day experiences of working with AI. And then as I got towards the end of writing the book, I came back to many of those people and asked them similar questions. And I found something really interesting, which was that many of the people who were most excited about the productivity gains, the efficiency gains associated with AI, that were using language like, I can get 30% more done a day or 100% more done a day. I'm going to knock all my KPIs out of the park because of that, right? And they were thinking about like squeezing the next piece of productivity out of themselves with AI's assistance. Those people were very enthusiastic at the start, and you would go back to them a year later, and they were very jaded and in some cases entirely burned out. And it was simply because what AI had done, what their implementation of AI had done, was turn them into something where all of the aspects of work that they kind of enjoyed were outsourced pretty much entirely to AI, and they just become this coordinator of that set of activities, and it had caused them to lose the joy of work. So basically, from the perspective of their managers, from the perspective of their organizations, they've gone from a highly engaged employee to a disengaged employee that caused a whole bunch of problems associated with it. And so, by contrast, people that were looking at AI, this is really a mindset thing above anything else, but people that were looking at AI and going, okay, I take pride in the quality of my work, and I want to use AI predominantly as a quality improver. I'm going to look through the various activities that I perform, and I'm going to take pride in this output, and then I'm going to find ways in which AI can make me better and produce my output more effectively. We get back to those people a year later, and they're flying, right? And that's really just a difference in mindset between the two. So what I would say specifically, as you mentioned, creative types. I think for creative types, this is the key. It's like, how do you engage with AI in a way that you feel as creative or more creative, that you're getting as much enjoyment, because your creativity is directly linked to the degree to which you enjoy your work. So are you getting as much fulfillment and enjoyment out of this new version that includes AI within it? And it's absolutely possible to do that. But it's all centered around how you frame your engagement with it. The other thing I wanted to mention, which you haven't got to yet in the book, but we talk about. Gosh, it's later on in the book. I think it's day 83. I got the book in front of me here. One area that I disagree with you ever so slightly, but it's only ever so slightly on the margins, would be around. I think you mentioned, well, it's just going to be impossible to not engage with AI. It's true that it's going to be impossible to live in a world where AI doesn't play a significant role. I mean, heck, if you're watching a movie on Netflix, AI is playing a very significant role in determining what you're watching. If you're sitting in front of a computer, AI is sitting behind the scenes determining what emails are your focused email versus the ones you can theoretically ignore, and getting rid of your spam and all of that kind of stuff. So AI will be there, but will we all be forced to interact with it? I think probably the answer to that is 98% of us will, but there will be roles. There will be roles that are defiantly human. I call those AI resistant roles, right? Where you're consciously staying clear of that in order to deliver something that is uniquely human. And it will be our modern technology equivalent of, like, I don't know, the artisan who makes leather purses or something along those lines, right? And it will be, and yes, those people engage with technology through Etsy and things like that. But basically the core of what they do is defiantly sort of separate from the world. So we think that there will be AI resistant roles. And I think I break it down into 4, actually. So AI builder, the people that are building AI itself, and the AI dominant roles where you're working really, really deeply alongside AI systems and optimizing them and training them. The vast majority of us will be what I refer to as AI enabled roles, whereby you're using AI to enhance your quality and your productivity and so on. And then there is that AI resistant role. So I think that the creative types, most of them are going to fit into that AI enabled category, and a very small percentage of them will be in that AI resistant category, whereby the value they provide is directly related to their resistance to AI. But if you can't half that, you can't half do that, right?
Yeah.
If you're going to do that, that's got to be how you're literally defining yourself. I am an AI free zone, and love me for that, right? Otherwise, if you're AI enabled, you really need to be good at being AI enabled.
Well, and I don't think we actually are disagreeing, because the creative part of me is an AI resistor. Now, I can't say I've always been successful in my resistance, but I feel I have the soul of an AI resistor in terms of anything that's where my goal is to say things that only I can say in a way that only I can say them. I want to stay true, but I will say I've taken that side of me, and I used Claude to do some editing. I wanted to see, well, how good could Claude be if I wrote something that I felt really good about, but if I asked Claude to, I used prompt engineering like you described, and I asked Claude to act as a professional level editor and a nonfiction editor, and I gave it a few other prompts, and I had to admit it identified a couple of redundancies. Now, in some cases, I, the human, had to say, well, actually, that's a conscious redundancy. I'm mentioning that a couple of times because I feel like the average reader needs to hear that particular thought. But there were others where, in fact, I was kind of wasting the reader's time by being redundant. But more subtly, what I found was that Claude, like out the gate, without any coaching to the tool, I wouldn't say it was overly nice, but it was overly validating. It was as if Claude was giving me just enough critical feedback for me to feel good about the positive feedback. It was mostly it's like that passive aggressive editor who marks up your manuscript with just a few comments because they know that's their job, but mostly they want to say to you, fantastic thinking, this is amazing, you're so insightful. And it just had that feel of so here's what I did. I did a different prompt, and I asked or directed Claude to be brutally honest, and I gave it a bunch of other feedback, basically saying, tell me what you really think, and then Claude suddenly became, it's like I was talking to a grizzled 60-year-old Jewish editor who couldn't find anything right. It was like markup.
Yeah.
It was like it was pointedly mean. I was mean, and I had to recognize, okay, you're just taking orders. You're not actually mean. It just feels mean. So, but for me, it was a great experiment in terms of could I use the tool as a creative editor. And to be honest, I kind of pulled away, and I'm going back to using it on the efficiency side and processing large amounts of information. But I think there's a tool. I mean, there's there's a role for it, I think, and for me personally, but I still feel like I have the soul of a resistor.
And absolutely nothing wrong
Yeah.
with that. And it helps you develop, I think, the degree of skepticism that that almost everybody that is really successful with AI has. You have to retain that degree of skepticism. And to come back to some of the themes when we started this conversation, like the way we're wired as humans makes that really, really difficult for us. So I think I allude to it in the book. There have been experiments done with groups of people that whereby you present them with information about a topic that they know really, really well. And so, for example, I happen to be an expert on the films of Laurel and Hardy. And if you were to, and of Orson Welles. So if you'd ask me about Orson Welles or Laurel and Hardy, I know a lot about it, right? And so if they were to, so that would be like kind of my equivalent, right? So if you presented, if I got AI to present me a page of information about Laurel and Hardy, whatever your equivalent of that is, we had them look through that, and then you'd have it present you with like a page of information about a topic you didn't know well. And what was worrying but not surprising was that for the topic that people knew well, they were like, oh yeah, this is full of holes, right? Or it's missing this, or it's emphasizing this wrongly, etc. But then you presented the thing they didn't know really well, and it was like, oh yeah, this is really in depth and detailed and great and useful and all that kind of stuff. And so you were trusting it telling you about stuff you didn't know, but not trusting you telling it about stuff you did know. So of course, as we start to think about how this is used in the workplace, that can become really challenging, because if you're using it as a means of sort of like plugging the gaps in areas where your knowledge is low, how are you going to figure out whether it's plugging the gaps well? How are you going to figure out whether it's presenting you with a worldview that if you had more experience, you would reject, right? These are the sorts of things that are really, really difficult for us to know as we look for it as a source of truth. Now, we've always had that issue, right? If you are if a plumber comes to your house and you know nothing about plumbing, the likelihood of you just absorbing what they say and trusting it is going to be greater. But it's sort of weaponized by the fact that AI can do this for any topic at any time, and that our work itself has become so unstructured and ambiguous that we might use it to do to fill a gap on any topic at any time.
When you use the word weaponized, it prompts me to think. You and I connected originally on LinkedIn. And if I go back to like pre-AI days, there was a certain, I had all of my LinkedIn connections, and there's a certain cadence that you expect from various people. I know, one guy who tends to post once a week, someone else posts once a month, a lot of people who don't post at all, a few people post images or funny videos. So there was a certain cadence. Yeah. And what I've noticed with the advent of AI usage, many, many more people are posting things many more times, and the things that they are posting are longer. And I guess I'm going to say this to all of my LinkedIn colleagues. I've gotten to a point where if you have you post an image and there's the beginning of an article, like the first 2 or 3 sentences, and then it says more, it just breaks my heart. I click on more, and suddenly, there's 8 paragraphs. Yeah. And I don't know that it's always true, but my gut is saying to me, buddy, you didn't used to write 8 paragraphs. Yeah. I used to be able to count on clicking an image and you'd have a quick little quote or a quick little whatever. Now suddenly I click on one of your posts and it's 6 paragraphs, 8 paragraphs. It's a link to a Substack, and now suddenly your Substack is miles deep when it didn't used to be. And I'm not saying all volume is bad, but I think in aggregate, because there's so much more volume, I personally think there's a lot of magic in learning to say more with less. And AI is not going to do that for you. Decide what you want to say, decide how you want to say it, and then ask yourself, does it really need 8 paragraphs? Does it really need 3 Substack articles? And even if it does, I think we're just getting exhausted, or I think I'm getting exhausted. And I find myself now avoiding clicking on a lot of LinkedIn posts that I would have clicked on before. I just don't have time to go that deep, that much. What say you, Paul Slater?
Well, again, you're raising points that are really deliciously complicated,
Yeah.
I would say. So, for example, there is absolutely no doubt that there has been an explosion of content across all forms of social media. And the social media companies are struggling to adjust their algorithms to be able to reflect that. And so I was speaking to a social media marketer just yesterday who was talking about it from the perspective who looked about how to gain reach for content in any reliable way. And I haven't personally validated this, I should say, but he was saying that basically if you want to have reach for any form of content on any platform, as a human, you're going to need to pay. And the purpose of paying is solely that automatically generated high volume slop will not be paid for, and yours will, and so therefore it will start to break through. That to me is just a symptom of the fact that yes, of course, it's an additional revenue stream for them, so great, but it's a symptom of the fact that basically a whole bunch of content is being created where a human is barely touching it, and the algorithms that are checking it are not sophisticated enough to really truly determine what is of high value and what is not, and so most of it is being missed. And I feel bad for people that are writing longer form content. Probably self-servingly I am, because I write quite a lot of long form content myself, right? And the long form content is being missed amongst all of this other stuff that is happening. Plus, I was reminded of your comment earlier on. You were talking about the creator who was like, "Oh, I'm having to pretend it's AI when it's not." Like, there's a flip of that, right? So, for example, you know what the M dash is? That's become like a popular.
Yes, yeah. I mean, it's like the telltale. Yes.
Yeah, the M dash is the long dash, right?
Yeah.
Now, I grew up. The M dash is not bad, right?
No, I love the M dash.
Yes. And I grew up reading Jane Austen and things, and I use M dashes naturally in my content, right? I know the shortcut key for M dash on my Windows and the and Mac computers, and I have for 20 years I've used the M dash quite a lot in a whole bunch of writing that I've done, and now I'm adjusting how I write. Removing M dashes from how I write so that I don't sound like AI, which is a ridiculous human thing that potentially you have to do. So I think that to come back to your to sort of the what I hope is the heart of your question, we have to. I think this is hopefully a phase while everything is being figured out, and while the companies that are theoretically serving us content that we would find useful are finding better ways of getting us the content that we will find useful. But I'll give you one example of where this is absolutely broken. I read a book. I read books all the time, a Kindle Unlimited subscription, and I read books all the time, and I review them increasingly now because I understand how massively useful reviews are for sales of books, right? If anybody's listening to this and reads a book, please review it afterwards. I hope you'll review it as well, Dan. But as I read other people's books and I look to increasingly review them, 3 or 4 times recently through my Kindle Unlimited subscription, I have read a book that was obviously written cover to cover by AI, and no human had even bothered to check it and they're selling
Wow.
it on
Yeah.
Amazon. So I can show you a Kindle version of a book whereby all of the headings are wrong, whereby the well, not all of the headings are wrong, but maybe 40% of the headings are wrong, whereby you've got words running into each other, a whole bunch of telltale signs that happen with some of the lower end AI models that have smaller contextual windows. And it is an AI written book, and a bad one, right? Eventually, we'll get to a point where some of the content that is being created on these platforms by AI is super good. And if it is, I guess it will go in the same mix as the human generated content, and we'll figure out how to engage with it. But we're not quite there yet, and nor are we quite there in terms of how higher value content is getting served to us, because they're literally dealing with a 10-fold, 20-fold increase. This is affecting, by the way, all aspects of creativity. This morning, I was speaking to a self-publishing company that deals with people that have self-published works. They told me that they've seen a 7 to 8-fold increase of submissions over the last 6 months. So.
Well, and I think we are reaching a point where AI is so good that, in fact, you can generate content that many people will consider good enough. You ask AI, hey, write a LinkedIn article on workplace reward and recognition programs, best practices. Bam, bam, bam. It'll do it, and it'll be respectful. It'll almost pick any topic, and it'll generate respectable content. But what I say to my friends and my colleagues is, we are all developing a sensitivity to this, where we recognize not just the telltales like the M dash. In some cases, it's just a sense that this is a really good article, but it has that feel of AI, that feel of everything's just, it's like going to a restaurant and having a meal. There's nothing wrong with it. I mean, it's perfectly fine pasta, but it just feels bland. It just feels too corrective. There's just, I don't know what the right word is, but somebody will probably invent a word and the word will mean feels like AI. That's like that. That's just that sense of it. And so then, as human authors, we will have to make sure that we not only eliminate the telltales, but we also eliminate that sense. Like, we write in a way that sounds like us, sounds like humans, and that sometimes is going to mean we make what would officially be grammatical errors, but in fact we intentionally repeat ourselves, or we intentionally use poor grammar, or we intentionally do things that humanize our writing. But instead, I think the vast majority of online content creators are going to go down this AI path, and they're not going to recognize that our sensitivities are getting higher and higher, where we do get it. We know that was written or generated by AI. It would be and I'll stop ranting about this, but it'll be the cognitive equivalent of recognizing when a video, you can tell when a video now is AI generated. It's still really good, it's still fantastic, but you just visually can see the telltales. I think we'll be able to cognitively sense this was not human. This was a really good AI generation. So I think
this is the area where the more I go into this, the less I feel I know, and the more open I am to being surprised by it. I don't know whether, as AI becomes more and more sophisticated, will we be able to tell? I don't feel comfortable enough to know the answer to that, and the reason that I don't is because I don't know how, as humans, we do detect that today. Do you know what I mean? So I mentioned before, I like Jane Austen. Could there be in 2 years' time a book that is written entirely by AI, that is a new Jane Austen novel, that if I didn't know that Jane Austen was dead, that I would recognize as being artificially created versus created by Austen. My suspicion is that we will get faster than we think. We will get to a point where it is indistinguishable to us as humans. And we will not, I suspect, we will not be able to tell. And I suspect we will not be able to tell faster than we think. But I also think that as and when that happens, it's likely that humans respond and react to things in an unpredictable way. I think what it's going to do is it's going to create a desire for authentic experiences that are marketed and advertised as non-AI. So I think, in other words, we'll assume that anything we see over a screen, anything we hear where there's a technology interface between us and the thing, or anything that is pre-created, that is created asynchronously, we're going to assume that's sort of AI created. And I suspect our response to that will be, I want to go see a live band or something along those lines, or I want to go to a poetry reading, or I want to see I want to see a real human being doing a real thing, knowing that it's a bit messy. And it will be the equivalent of that, like, for example, the drumming on Zeppelin tracks is better because it's not 100% perfect. And I suspect that we'll be able to recreate that imperfection, right, in a way that sounds normal and real and real to us, but we won't be able to create the magic of actually going to a Zeppelin concert and seeing the different imperfections that you get in a live scenario when he's feeling a bit off or whatever it would happen to be. So I think I don't know, but I think I think we're not that far away from the, in quotes, art that is being generated by AI to be indistinguishable from what humans are, or better than. And we haven't really thought about that, right? Is there if we think that, I don't know why I keep mentioning Jane Austen so much, but if we think of Jane Austen as like the premier novelist in the English language, which I would, right? Doesn't mean she was perfect. Is it possible to write a better Jane Austen novel than, say, my favorite, Mansfield Park? It might be.
Or if you didn't like the ending, okay, have a version written where different people end up with different people,
or certainly one that appeals more to you,
yes.
Right? So in other words, like, and that is really interesting. Like, right, my belief as to Mansfield Park being her best novel, a lot of people don't believe that, right? And so maybe they don't because there was something in them that caused it to not fully resonate with them. And now maybe AI knows exactly what that person needs to make Mansfield Park perfect for them, and then it creates the perfect Mansfield Park for that person. That could be very exciting, but it could also be kind of scary at the same time. And I think, Dan, that's another misconception thing. Like, AI turns everything up to 11, right? It's going to do things that we never thought possible in a very, very positive way. It's going to do things that we never thought possible in a very, very negative way. And we, as humans, have got to be the most adaptable, resilient creatures we can possibly be so that we can thrive in that world.
You may remember that I'm a big fan of UK detective procedural series.
I do.
Like Shetland and Happy Valley. Yeah. I'm also a big fan of UK-based baking shows, like the Great British Bake Off. So I could ask AI, could you create a hybrid of the two, a British baking show where people get murdered and then detectives come in to solve murders? And I wouldn't have to wait for some producer to come up with this idea. Let's combine Shetland with the Great British Baking Off and see what results. So possibly there is a world of unlimited possibilities coming up for us. But in the meantime, there are going to be people who lose their jobs. There are going to be people who shift their careers.
Absolutely.
What I feel for most are younger generations, and I know we have to wrap up here shortly, but I guess maybe I thought we'd end on this. If you were a younger version of yourself and you were trying to navigate your way through your early career, leveraging these various technologies. What guidance would you give to yourself today?
Okay, I sometimes sit down with younger people for hours talking about this, so I'll do my very
Again, I
best
ask
to
you
be
a
short.
question that is, because I wrote this phrase down, deliciously complicated. I'm going to use that phrase again.
So it is deliciously complicated. I think there's a couple of things that really spring to mind. I think there are absolutely fundamentals of good work that are things that we've not really had to do really well, but we now have to focus a lot of our time and attention on. In the book, I talk about something called the Magnificent Seven capabilities, and there people will see about it if they read the book. But very briefly, it's readiness, organization, control, balance, motivation, resilience, and adaptability. And those sound like sort of high level terms, but we actually get very practical as to how to build those and how to make sure they build upon each other. The big picture story behind the AI Ready Human is that there's the technology that we all have to become more comfortable with. But the most complicated piece of the puzzle is, as I mentioned before, the most complicated entity in this entire picture, which is the human, which is you. And most of us spend very little time working on our own human capabilities in a practical way in order to be able to try to improve them, right? In our work, and the research that I've done over the course of the last year or two for this book, I've seen that most of us spend maybe 1% to 2%, if that, of our time focused on building our own human capabilities along the lines of the ones that I was just describing. Right? If you're listening to this podcast, you're probably spending more time working on that than most people do. Mm-hmm. We need to be working on those types of capabilities every single day, right? Becoming like the maestro of ourselves, right? Being really good at that type of stuff. And I think that needs to go from being something that was kind of like a nice to have or something you would pick up through osmosis, through the actions of work, to something that you consciously work on every day. And I think it also potentially translates to choices that people make in terms of what they do at university, in terms of classes they take, in terms of things that they do. They need to elevate the work that they do on their durable skills, if you want to call it that, but basically the human skills that they need to bring to the table. If you figure that out, then you become the most adaptable, most resilient human that can then thrive in this new world of work. So spend a bit less time on the technical side, or spend a bit less time pointlessly doom scrolling online, and spend a bit more time focusing on those things, and consciously spend every day getting that 1% better that you need to in order to be able to work well in this world.
That is great insight. I wish when I was younger, I had focused more on courses like applied psychology, practical communication, even corporate anthropology, like really studying the human aspect of business. Now, over the decades, I have evolved and absorbed a lot of that learning, but how far would I be if I had really focused on that early on and really driven that learning? I think you make a really good point that in a world as we go forward where AI, it's not that you can't get away from it, but it will be ever present in most careers, most circumstances. Building those distinctly human capabilities to a higher level than ever before earlier than most people would have than ever before. Man, I think that's great advice. So to wrap this up, I would like to say to those who are listening to this podcast, I'm reading the AI Ready Human. I am about a third of the way through, as I mentioned earlier, and then I quickly before this podcast scrolled through the majority of it, so I get a sense of the overall work. It feels to me like a very useful, practical learning journey that Paul takes you through. It's so Paul has done a lot of research, a lot of reading, a lot of thinking, a lot of processing. And I think what a person can do is use this book to accelerate their own AI readiness and then continue their own learning journey beyond. So you can compress your learning journey very dramatically through a book like this. So I'm a huge advocate. I appreciate you being on the podcast. Any final words that you want to say, Paul?
No, I think you summed it up beautifully. Regardless of whether people buy the book or not, I just would urge people to start thinking about themselves as constantly in the mold of a job hunter looking for that next relevant position. 90% of the jobs, I reckon, might be less than that, but probably around there. 90% of the jobs that exist today are not going to be around in about 10 years' time. It's going to disrupt every aspect of everything we do. So whether you buy this book or not, or whether you go down your own personal journey on it, focus like a laser on the idea of being the most adaptable, resilient human that you can be. Because anybody that tells you they know what's coming up, they don't really, and neither do you. So you got to be ready for anything.
Well, I will not say, regardless of whether you buy the book or not, because although Paul and I, we've never met in real life, we've met virtually. Paul is my friend. He may be a virtual friend, but he is my friend.
Yeah.
So if you don't buy Paul's book, you are dead to me. It's done. So
I love that.
Paul's
Let's go with that.
book.
Let's juice those sales.
Adamant. Now we won't make that little clip a short. We won't cut a short thing. But I do. It just feels very useful. And I wouldn't say it if it wasn't. And I've read plenty of books that were interesting but not useful. This one is deliciously complicated and interesting and useful. So that's my endorsement for the book. Paul, thank you so much.